All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the EPPP Coaching Circle. I am Dr. Jordan, and I'm joined today by a guest speaker, a licensed psychologist, and EPPP coach, Dr. Erica Ligons. And Erica, I'm going to let you take it from here for a while, but I may chime in, but I'd love for you to very formally introduce yourself and let us know.
Absolutely. We have about maybe 40 minutes about.
Um, I don't have a hard end time, but if you do, let us know and we'll watch it.
Okay. Okay. All right. So my name is Dr. Erica Liggins, as Jordan just mentioned, and I live in the Chicago, Illinois area, and I have been licensed since, oh my, the years are all blending together. Was that 2015, 2016, something like that? Like so many of you, I was studying while I was on my postdoc. I had a really kind of high intensity community mental health postdoc, which I loved, but it was a lot of work. After a few false starts and a little bit of procrastination, I finally started, and some tears, I finally started my study process in, I guess it was 2015. And some kind of way, through determination, some of the techniques I'm going to talk with you about today, as well as a really solid study plan. Even with having ADHD and never having ever done well on standardized tests, I was able to pass on the first try with a score over 600, which to this day, sometimes I still can't fully wrap my head around because I still felt like I was guessing for most of the test. Which a lot of you have previous attempts, you know exactly what I'm talking about. But nonetheless, I didn't end up actually becoming a coach until 2019 at the urging of a friend slash colleague of mine who I kind of informally coached one of her friends. And she just said, whatever you did was really helpful. And that person was able to pass successfully on their second try. And so I started coaching informally. And now I coach about 10 to 12 people a week. It's been really exciting. It's been crazy doing this during COVID times. That has definitely altered a lot of people's study plans and ability to take the test when they want to, but people are finding their way through it, and it's been really exciting to support people during this challenging adventure of studying for this test. So that's a little bit about me. I currently work at a group practice. I left the community mental health, what was that, January of 2020, and started with this group practice, and it's been really exciting, and I'm enjoying working from home. So, yeah.
Awesome.
So oh, go ahead, Jordan. Do you want to say something?
I connect with so much of that, but I'll let you keep talking. I'm curious. So for participants who are listening along, you can use that chat feature, right? If you're not wanting to interrupt, like like I just did, Erica, and you have a question, you can go ahead and put it in the chat box. Otherwise, I'm gonna do my best to let Erica keep talking. Unless you say that you're looking for something from me, I'll just let you keep on going.
Perfect. Okay, so today I thought it would be a good idea to talk more about the mindset and emotional aspect of this test. So we know that studying for the EPPP and trying to fit this into our lives with kids, family, partners, job, whatever else you have going on in your life is not particularly an easy thing. And so often my coaches will say to me, they'll say, Erica, why is this so hard? Why am I struggling so much? And I have found, I think there are 5 reasons why people are struggling so much. Now, we are already tired from grad school. Can anyone resonate with that? Please put, I like interaction, so please type in the comment box. If you are burnt out from grad school already, I see Blair is like, yes, I relate to that. We've already, it feels like we've already run a marathon and now you're asking us to do something else. And so we're just tired, we're just tired. Not to mention the fact that, I don't know about you all, there are so many activities and movies and trips and things that I just did not do during my grad school time due to lack of time, energy, and resources. And so I don't know about you, but when you're finally done, it's like you come out of a cave and you want to like get in touch with the rest of the world. I'm still trying to catch up on TV shows that were popular during that time. because I just feel like I missed out on so much life. And people around you too, they want to see you again. They want to be able to spend time with you again. And so when you get that diploma, people think you're done, but it's like, psych, just kidding, you're really not done. Also, the process of studying for this test is truly independent study. It's very similar to the dissertation. You know, there are a lot of folks out here who struggle to finish their dissertation on time because it's kind of under your control, right? You're left to your own devices. And so all of our beautiful strengths and gifts come out during this process, but also so do all of our areas of growth, our hangups, our shortcomings. So if you have difficulties with procrastination, time management, if you have a tendency to self-sabotage at times or other different challenges, all of that is going to come out during this process. It really brings out the best and the worst in us. Not to mention the fact that for a lot of us, other things in life happen during grad school. Some people have children, got married, or maybe they put those things purposely on hold during grad school, and then as soon as they come out, I can't tell you how many people, as soon as they graduated, within 6 months they've bought a house, got married, and popped out a baby. Well, maybe the baby not in 6 months, but you know what I mean. So suddenly their life is totally different than the way it was when they were in grad school, and now it's like, oh, I have to figure out how to also study for, basically do another semester essentially, with now a spouse or this or that or the other going on in life. So it can feel like such a juggling act. Not to mention the fact that extended family sometimes requires additional support. Maybe you're caretaking for elderly parents. We're just getting pulled in a lot of different directions. And last but not least, it's just easier not to study. Again, we're tired, we're exhausted. It's just so much easier to put our feet up on the couch and just say tomorrow, right? Jordan, do you think you could, do you remember resonating with any of that when you were going through your process?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm so thankful. I say this all the time that I studied for and passed my EPPP before I had kids and before I met my husband, because these things would have been much, much harder if I wasn't just, as you said, in control of my own time, right? I was during that time. I think I was on a, part-time postdoc and, doing some tutoring and test prep, but I really controlled my own schedule and could go home and close the door and study.
Yeah,
That's
and
not
it was still hard, right?
It's still hard. I still had to keep everything clean. As you said, the procrastination thing came out. I usually was not super clean at that time in my life, but my bedroom had to be spotless or I wouldn't study, right? Or
Mm-hmm.
the desk had to be spotless or I couldn't start. So absolutely. I still have
Absolutely.
that, even with less challenges on my plate than most people have today.
Yeah, and so I really have so much empathy for people who are balancing a lot of different things. Uh, so here's the next thing I want to talk about, which is, and this is going to sound really crazy, but we all have to ask ourselves, not only do we really want to pass, but are we really ready to pass this test? Now, of course, I know all of you are like, duh, yes, of course I'm ready to, but it's not that simple. See, here's the thing, when you pass this test, especially if you live in a state where you don't have any other tests to take, which most of them, though, even if you do, they're not as intimidating as the EPPP. So for a lot of people, even if they have other steps like an oral exam or whatever, this for most people feels like the big thing, right? Like the final thing. This means not only are you done with the test, but it just means like it's like the end of an era of your life. And as awful as the grad school experience can be with the stress and the just amount of work that's on you and the limited resources, financial resources that you have when you're still unlicensed, it also can provide things, right? It can provide a sense of protection from full responsibility out there in the field because you're still a student or you're still unlicensed. It can also provide a great distraction, maybe from other things going on in your personal life that one would rather not deal with. So it's really important to get in touch with ourselves and ask ourselves, what will it mean for me when I pass this thing, and how will my life change? What will I get from this? What will this say about me, or how will I feel about myself, and what will this do in my life? Because even though your conscious mind may be saying, yes, I want to be done, I want to be done, there might be some unconscious things going on that really are keeping you stuck and engaging in behaviors that essentially sabotage your ability to pass the test. So I'll give you some examples. I've worked with folks who didn't really realize how much underlying feelings of inadequacy or self-worth or self-esteem issues were really impacting their ability to pass this test, whether it was making them just believe that they couldn't do it, or sometimes it can even go deeper than that, where people may not even feel worthy of passing or finally being done or making a great salary or being a professional. You know, not everyone grows up in circumstances where they're used to having a position of esteem. I still get chuckled. And Jordan, please tell me if this happens to you. Whenever people find out I'm a doctor, like their tone changes. It's so weird. It's so weird. Does that happen to you, Jordan? Please share.
Oh,
Or
absolutely,
anyone else who
absolutely.
wants to share in the comments too.
Yes. They, especially when you say psychologists too, they're all like, oh, they get
Yes,
scared the other
doctor.
day.
Yes, doctors.
And I think it's in a lot of my interactions now, it's like me and my husband and my daughter, and my husband's very chatty. I like to think I'm an extrovert, but he's like off the charts. So he'll babble on about his work and they'll be like, oh, like, do you work? And I'm like, yeah, I'm a licensed psychologist. I run a group practice. They're like, oh, right. I just assumed you were a mommy, right? I just assumed you just didn't do anything else. Like, no, I spent my whole life in school. Cool.
Right. I mean, people, it's and that can really throw you off. Like I chuckle at it. I still think it's really funny because I grew up from really humble beginnings. And so for me, when people get all like, yes, doctor, and I'm like, oh my gosh, this is so this is so funny to me. But, depending on what's going on for you internally, that could make you feel really uncomfortable or what have you. So I find that especially for those who maybe their first generation to go to college or maybe come from like immigrant families or have been pulled themselves up from poverty, passing the test can really kind of be mess with your head a little bit. It can really change obviously social economic status, which we don't realize sometimes how much of our identity and how we see ourselves in the world is so tied to that. And so sometimes people even feel like they might be betraying their family or where they come from by now becoming this doctor with the license and all this stuff. So these are things that you really have to be reflecting on and asking yourselves, does any of that apply to me? Because it may be unconsciously sabotaging you. Not to mention imposter syndrome. So many people are scared to get licensed. I remember I was like, oh my gosh, people are going to expect all this stuff from me. They're going to think I'm supposed to know things. And I definitely felt that. So sometimes we feel nervous about being done and having all of this additional responsibility because we're no longer working under someone else's license. We're working under our own license. And even you might even get into a position where you have students underneath of you. So now you have to be kind of watching what they're doing. And it's just a lot of responsibility. Now, this is another huge one. Sometimes people aren't sure of what they want to do once they're licensed. I can't tell you how many people sabotage themselves with not keeping their study schedule, not staying the course, because deep down inside, they just don't know what they want to do for work yet. And so by staying in the rat race of studying for the EPPP, even though it's awful and they consciously are saying, this is awful, I hate this, I want to be done, unconsciously, the drive to not confront that they're not sure yet what they want to do is stronger than the misery of being in this situation. So that's another thing. If you don't know what you want to do yet, here's the thing. Just because you pass the EPPP and get licensed doesn't mean you have to immediately make a decision. it's okay to maybe hang out in your position that you're in for a few months or even another year as you kind of figure out what you want to do. I think it's important to take away any of these beliefs that you have that as soon as I get licensed, I have to automatically move in this way or that way, because sometimes people need a little bit of time to figure out their next step. And that's okay. So don't let that stop you from studying and getting this thing over with. And I think I alluded to this before that sometimes people unconsciously don't want to pass because there are other challenges that they're going on in their life that they don't want to deal with. And so staying again in the rat race of studying and being unlicensed and all of that is a great excuse to not move forward with getting married to that person that you're not sure you want to get married to. And that person saying like, and it's easier to say, you know, hey, let me pass the test first before we go do that. And when really the issue is you just don't want to marry that person. So these are some of the things that are happening for people underneath the surface that is sabotaging them. And I really wanted to touch on those things because even I sometimes when I'm coaching people, you know, we're hitting walls, right? And sometimes it takes a while for some of these things to really come out and show themselves that this is what's really going on. Does anybody have any questions or comments about any of those things? Feel free to type in the chat.
And I know that it can be hard to be vulnerable, right, in this space because we are recording, and I think, and or it's a group setting, and I think there are a lot of people who, you know, maybe would prefer to have those conversations individually, and that's fine.
Yeah,
But
or even if you know people.
someone wants to jump in, feel free, but I can talk.
Right, and even
Not
if some of
necessarily
you
about
know
my
people.
client, but many a person I've worked with.
Oh,
And then
gotcha.
and I feel some of that has been true for me. Yeah. Interesting, as you were talking about it, I was actually thinking back to my dissertation process and going, "Oh, I think a lot of that was happening for me in my dissertation." Right. I'm like, oh, and I think I maybe got through it there. And then EPPP wasn't as hard because I had worked through some of that. But my dissertation dragged out, right? I was a one and done for the EPPP, but my dissertation had 3 different topics. Right? It was hard, right? What do I want to do? Who do I want to be? And imposter syndrome is real, right? Basically, everybody I talk to has it. I have it. I'm sure you have it. We all have it, right? Like,
I still have it.
everybody has it. It's just that's just what it's like. And I'm like, unless you're like a total narcissist, we all doubt ourselves, right? We were all going, "Ooh, am I a real psychologist? Am I a real adult?" Right? I'm still struggling with adulting. This is hard.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much for sharing that. And even if people maybe don't want to talk about their own personal stories, you probably all know someone who you went through your program with where this came out. But this is real. This is so real. And I think for everybody's probably battling with one of those things that I mentioned on some level. So thank you for sharing, Jordan, your experience, because I think you're right. It either comes out with the dissertation or the EPPP, one of them. And if they're not dealt with, then it will transfer right over to the EPPP, and you have to deal with those things for both. So now I want to talk a little bit about some of the problematic beliefs that we have during this process. So first and foremost, the biggest one has got to be, I'm never going to pass this test. Now, you might be thinking to yourself, well, why would anyone want to believe that? Or you won't be surprised how many people really fundamentally in the back of their mind believe that they just can't do it. And as the old saying goes, whether you think you can or you can't, you're right. And that couldn't be more true. So walking around with the fundamental belief that you just can't pass this test is absolutely one of the biggest things that's going to take you out of the game. Not to mention other beliefs that often come along with that, such as, if I study enough, then I will know all the questions on the test and won't be surprised by any of the content. This has got to be probably one of the most problematic beliefs that comes up a lot when I'm coaching, because nobody likes to be surprised. You know, we are high achieving people. If you made it this far in school, you are a high achieving person. You clearly have a lot of capability. And so it can be really disheartening when you're used to studying, putting the time in, going to take a test, seeing content that you studied, and excelling, to suddenly go to take a test. Half of it looks insane, like you've never seen any of it, and to be totally rocked and with your confidence shaken. So that's really hard for people. So a lot of people develop this belief that if they can just know everything, then the next time they go to take the test, they'll be fine. They won't be surprised. I saw you immediately have a reaction, Jordan. Have you come across, did you
So
have that belief yourself?
I didn't have that belief, but it just like it feels so absurd, right? Having taken it and been doing test preparation with people for many years and seen so many practice questions, like there's still stuff that I go, I don't know. Like I've taught the whole EPPP. I've gone through it all, and I still see things like I've never heard of this person. I don't know what this term is, or just this is a weird question, right? Why did they word it like this? It's crazy. Like, and you don't need to know everything, and no one does, right? There is no point where you have all the material covered. It's just, do you know enough? Right? Do you know enough and have enough of the skills to pass? We're not expected as licensed providers to have answered every question.
Absolutely.
Absolutely not. It's impossible. It's absurd. Yeah, it just feels overwhelming. That would be overwhelming. And I run into that with my supervisees a lot too, where they get really caught off guard if a client asks them a question they don't know the answer to. It's
Yep.
okay. We don't have to know everything. We can look it up later and come back in the next session and bring it in and talk about it. We don't have to be encyclopedias that can recite everything from all of psychology. It's crazy.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more, which then brings people to another problematic thought, which is it all depends on the version of the test you get. So this thought is really, 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 really insidious, because what it does is it takes all of your power out of it. It takes away any of your own ability to control your destiny here, and it leaves it solely up to what version you get. I've heard people say a lot of things. Well, my test had more stats questions, or my test had more this, or that person, they only passed because they must have gotten an easier version. Which, what bias is that? Oh, shoot. Where you're like,
Fundamental,
oh, they only did well because, hmm?
fundamental attribution error.
I think it's one of those. I see, as soon as you take the test, you forget all this stuff. It's great. But you all should look that up. If anybody knows the answer, type in the comments. Um, so when we get into this mind game, I've even had people ask me like, well, should I try to take it at a certain time to see if I can get a certain version? And I'm like, I don't know when they offer the versions. I don't know. I mean, they say there's 4 at any given time floating around, but there's absolutely no way of knowing when you're going to get which version. And no matter what version you get, it's all weighted to be the same in the end. So even if you get a technically easier version, you have to get more questions correct. Oh, someone said actor observer bias. Thank you. You have to get more correct in order to pass, or if you get a harder version, you can get less correct to pass the test. So it doesn't matter what version you get, is the point. It just doesn't. So another problematic thought that I hear is, if they would just make the test more straightforward, then I could pass. So again, this puts all the power in their hands. And it means that something has to change about the process in order for you to be able to make it through, which again just further perpetuates the idea that you have no power in this situation. So this is another thought that I just really try to support people to get out of their head, because the test isn't going to change. It is the way it is. Another problematic thought is if I get questions wrong, even when on the practice test, then I won't pass the real thing. So again, sometimes we have really unrealistic sort of expectations of ourselves. We come in with these beliefs of like, I should just know everything already. Half this content you probably haven't seen in years or have never seen at all. I've had people tell me things like they're so devastated from the score on their initial diagnostic test when they go to start studying. And because they really truly had the belief that they were going to pass the initial diagnostic test. And when they get like a 40%, they're devastated. So we really have to make sure we have really realistic expectations about what we're asking of ourselves and know that practice tests are just that. They're practice. And so it's really important when you're doing questions to not put so much weight on it. Sometimes coaches become so dysregulated by getting wrong answers on practice tests that it can cause intense emotional reactions, such as crying or leaving the test altogether, because their thought process of what they're making this test question mean is so enormous that it causes such a huge emotional letdown when it doesn't work out. So we really have to watch our beliefs about how we approach even doing things like practice tests. There's two more problematic thoughts that I see come up a lot, which is I have to get an 80% or more on the practice test in order to pass the real thing. Or people will say, well, it doesn't even matter what you get on these things. Neither one of those beliefs are true. Now, practice tests are not 100% indicators of how you will do on the test, but they can be a general guide. Even as someone who scored as high as I did, I never got above an 80% on a practice test. But I'll also say that in the end, I was passing them at the same time. And I would say most of the people who I've coached, they're at least passing or around passing the practice tests when they go to take the real thing. There's always outliers, but to think that you have to get crazy high scores to pass or that it doesn't even matter at all, I think is pretty black and white thinking, and neither one of those thoughts is helpful. Any questions, comments, reactions about some of these problematic thoughts? You've noticed some of those thoughts have come up for you, or Jordan, I don't know if you remember having any of them yourself.
I have seen in this, like in both in this group in general and other people I've worked with one-on-one, the fear of practice tests. That
Oh,
has been big, being like, oh, how'd you do on your practice test? And people say, oh, I haven't taken any of those. I'm going to wait till I've studied the whole content. Right? I'm not going to touch that because it is, you have to assume it is that, right? It's that fear that if you don't have a passing score on a practice test, then you won't pass the exam, right? Which isn't true, right? We all start out with pretty low scores on those original practice tests. Someone will say, oh, I only got a 50% on a practice test. And I'll be like, that's amazing. That's great. That's a really high place to start out. A lot of people I've worked with, or I think in general, that first practice test is around like 30 or 40%. Right? You're not getting much right in the beginning, but you're growing. That's the point of the practice. That's the beginning.
Absolutely.
And it grows.
Yeah.
We had Dr. Jablon come as a guest speaker, and I just remember her. This really stood out for me. Her saying, even people who go on to pass have this sense of, oh my gosh, I've never seen this before. I don't think I'm doing well.
Yep.
We all have those thoughts, right? So the questions catch us off guard.
Mm-hmm.
But it
Absolutely.
just means that question was hard, right?
Absolutely. And speaking of the initial diagnostic test that you should take when you first start studying, I know personally for me, I got like in the mid 40s, maybe. No, probably low 40s. I've even had coaches who scored like in the 20s and go on to pass the real thing. As I always say, it's not where you start, it's where you end up. So we just really have to release that. And that goes back to my initial point around what are your beliefs and expectations that you're bringing into this? Because if you have a habit of having perfectionistic thinking or really unrealistic expectations of yourself, it's going to come out in this process. So I actually think studying for this test is a great self-improvement tool, and we can use it to learn a lot about ourselves and where we still need to grow as people. So, of course, when we're walking around with all of these pressures, responsibilities, negative thoughts, maybe underlying issues that might be fighting against us, of course, we're going to have some emotions that we're going to be going through as we go through this process. Some of the top emotions that I see a lot of people experiencing are anxiety, anger, overwhelm, despair, and guilt. So here's the thing. I felt every single last one of those emotions during the process. I told you all I had some tears when I first started studying. After I read the book, just of like how to study, I crawled up into a ball, like curled up into a ball and bawled my eyes out in complete despair because I just was like, how am I going to do this? So I have definitely had all of these feelings. The problem, though, is when you get stuck in these feelings. So a lot of times the way it looks is, for example, someone will be doing a practice test and they'll get hit with a question that's weird. It's about a topic they've never seen, and their mind immediately goes to, I'm never going to pass this test. I can't know all this content. Where did this come from? No matter what I do, I'll never be able to pass. Or people get to a place of anger. They're like, this test is wrong. It shouldn't have these kind of questions. Or they'll even stop in the middle of a practice test, go rummaging through their study materials, trying to find if that concept was ever in their study materials, and becoming very angry and bitter that that question was on the test. Or people get really overwhelmed. I can't tell you how often I'm talking to people and they'll just say, how am I ever going, with their hands on their head like this, how am I ever going to be able to learn all this content? How can I possibly keep all this in my head? Just feeling so overwhelmed and burdened by all of this material, which then leads people to feel a lot of despair. I mean, just complete and utter despair. And the guilt comes in when people feel like they're not keeping up with other areas of their life, and or they feel like they're letting family and friends down, again because family and friends may not fully understand that this isn't just another test. It's like the test of all tests. And so they may be putting pressure, not in a negative way or an intentional way, but they may just not be fully understanding why this is taking up so much of your time and your energy and why it's causing you so many emotions. And so a lot of times people feel guilty that they're letting family and friends down. Do you, Jordan, remember these emotions coming up for you during your process?
I know I'm the outlier. I know I am. I was a tutor and test prep instructor before the EPPP. I was excited to study. I thought it was fun. And I know that is not the case.
Yeah, that's not normal.
That's not normal. I know that's not the case. So, but absolutely, I know that that is common, and it's something that I've heard from other people. I know I'm the weirdo, which is why I'm running like an EPPP coaching circle, because I like studying. I like the content. I'm weird, but absolutely acknowledge that that is not the norm.
Yep, definitely not the norm. I certainly do not love studying. I did not like grad school. I love our field. I love the work we do, but I hate school, and I was so glad when it was over, and I don't like studying. um, does anyone want to share in the comments, maybe, like when you're taking practice tests, if you find yourself getting really angry or really anxious or overwhelmed? I know for me, just even the sight of my study materials made me overwhelmed, made me sick to my stomach at times, just even seeing the actual books stacked up on each other. So this is very normal to go through this. Kashara says all of the above. Yep. Thank you for sharing that, because that's real. I think I went through waves of all those emotions. So again, it's the problem isn't to have the emotions. The problem is when we get stuck there and we don't know how to regulate ourselves and soothe ourselves out of these feelings to keep going. And if you don't do that, what can happen is these can change your behavior. You can start to overstudy. I see a lot of my high anxiety coaches studying insane hours, 40 hours a week studying, along with working 40 hours a week. And they just burn themselves out, literally, like to the point where they even sometimes have to take a break from studying to refuel themselves so that they can actually even continue with the process. Or some people just avoid it. They just flat out avoid studying certain topics. They avoid maybe reviewing their content because they just feel so overwhelmed with how they're actually going to be able to learn and retain it. Or they just, don't put as many hours in as they should because it just feels really overwhelming. Let's see. Oh, and the other thing is, even when people, they may not think that they're avoiding anything because they're still putting their time and their hours in, but even when they're studying, they're just not fully present because they're so in their head. And I know that feeling. I remember getting so anxious sometimes, just worrying about failing as I was studying when I first started, that sometimes I couldn't even tell you what I just read. I had to like go back and reread the paragraph I just read because I wasn't fully there. Someone mentioned that they have ADHD and find it hard to organize themselves. Understand that, and that's why I have a really systematic study plan that I use that took all the guesswork out of it. That was so systematic that there was no like, where do I start? What do I do? I just followed the plan and it worked. And as someone who has ADHD, I totally relate to that. And I'm going to talk about in a little bit why it is so important to get ourselves organized and how we can get organized. So now that we know all the problematic stuff and what can get in the way, what do we actually do, right? To actually manage the emotional aspect of all of this. And the first thing is we have to watch how we talk about this test. I do not call this test the beast. A lot of people refer to it as that, and I'm like, we have to erase that word from our vocabulary. Let's not give this test any more power than it has, Also, if you have had past testing experiences with the EPPP, please do not refer to them as traumas. So often, and I don't want to downplay how difficult it is to walk out of there having not passed the test. I don't want to minimize that at all. But when we use really heavy loaded language like trauma language, again, it just further puts us in a fight or flight, traumatized state of mind when we're relating to this test. Because think about it, who wants to sit down and do something that feels traumatic to them? No one. So if we talk about the test in that way, then you're just setting up even more roadblocks to get back into studying. Have you heard of people calling the test the beast, Jordan? I see it on the Facebook groups all the time.
I'm guilty. You said it, and I was like, oh man, I know. I do, right? I've heard so many people call it the beast that oftentimes when people reach out, well, I'll say, I try to be like acknowledging and use their language. Yeah, it is a beast of an exam, right? So I've done that, and now I'm feeling like, oh, that's not helpful. That's not helpful. There's other language and other metaphors that would be more growth promoting, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
I'm watching my language now too. Tackle the exam, beast of an exam. I'm guilty. I'm doing these. What language do you use? Because I would love to switch gears. I would love to fix that on my end.
Yeah, so I try to use balanced language. Like the test is challenging. So I will say it's a challenging test. So, because I also don't think it helps to try to use flowery language or try to make it seem like it's something it's not, because then your brain isn't going to accept that anyway. So, yeah, I will call it just a test. It's a challenge, it's difficult, and it can be overcome. And that's how I kind of tend to talk about it. I don't like to use these really intense words. So, I think the biggest thing that helped me and that really helps my coachees is when they get to a place of radical acceptance around the test itself. When you get to a place when you accept that the test is and will always be convoluted and will include material that you are not familiar with. Now, it's easier said than done to get to that place, but the quicker you can get there, the easier it is for you to then accept a new way of thinking about the test, which is what is ultimately going to have you pass, which is when you accept the fact that this test is not about knowing everything. It's really about having a solid base of content mastery from your study materials combined with the ability to be able to regulate your emotions so that you can effectively apply the content knowledge that you do have. That is what this test is. Period. End of story. And the quicker you can get to accepting that, the better. Because then when you're studying, you're not going to be going through these huge, like, intense emotions, feeling like you're failing 1 second, feeling on top of the world the next second, and going through all this emotional roller coaster, looking up stuff, trying to find where was this, where was that, calling the company, asking them where they're getting these questions from. I mean, people get so caught up in these emotions, they end up going off the path of studying and wasting their time and energy in things that's just not going to help them. So getting to a place where you accept the test as it is and you recognize that you can pass it anyway is the biggest thing that is going to create a shift for you. And I noticed for me personally, when I was actually taking the test, because I had been preparing myself and prepping myself for months that it was going to be that way, it did cause a little bit of heightening of anxiety every time I got a difficult or out there question, but it didn't send me through the roof. And I had such well-practiced skills to regulate myself that I was easily able to calm down and stay focused and apply the knowledge I had and effectively pick the right one. Let's see here. Does that make sense, Jordan? Have you noticed when people make that shift to really accepting the test that something happens with their behavior or their attitude around the test?
Yeah, absolutely. I've seen that, and I loved what you were talking about, where people, get so caught up in this one question, right? They want to spend like an hour and a half, on one question and why it this, that, or whatever. Some of them just suck, right? Some of the questions are just poorly worded and confusing.
Mm-hmm.
They're not all amazing. And that's okay. It's an imperfect system, right? It's not, if I were developing a way to determine whether psychologists are ready for independent practice, this would not be it.
No.
Like, no, what? Like, why is this even the process? And I see people get caught up in that and get angry about that. And truthfully, there is, right? There is like a whole political movement going on to like try to overturn the EPPP. Like that's happening. And I think for this reason. And it is the same process for pretty much every other licensed profession, right? My husband's doing the same thing for his brokerage test, right? It's less content, believe me. It's there's less on it, but it's the same process. It's 200 questions, 4 hours. You go to the testing center. The questions are worded poorly, right? It's the same, right? This is
Right.
just this we've got going on, and right to get so caught up in those imperfections of the system just takes away from being able to acknowledge it for what it is, right? This is a wonky question. This is a weird one. This is a hard one. This is a challenging one. Don't spend too much time on it and keep moving.
Yeah. Do you know what I would tell myself during the real test? Every time I got a weird question, I would say to myself, oh, that's one of the 50.
Oh, nice.
And that works for me to just release it and let it go. I'm like, oh, that's probably one of the ones they're going to get rid of. It's okay. and that works for me. So
And it
you got to
might
see
be.
how it works.
It very much might be, right? That they do have test question is confusing. What is their official language for the ones that don't count?
Experimental questions?
Experimental questions, right?
Mm-hmm.
The ones that will not be graded in terms of whether you pass or fail, but they're experimenting to see if this has the same validity as the other questions. And a lot of them don't. They don't get used.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. So that's what I personally use. So here's the thing, some other things you should do. Be in therapy. You need a therapist. Again, you're balancing a lot of things. Uh, there's a lot of unconscious things that could be coming up for you. Also, people come into this, like myself, with ADHD, anxiety, history of depression, whatever else, OCD. And if those things are not regulated through either medication or different behavioral strategies or whatever you use, it will impact your studying. I have worked with folks with ADHD, for example. Their study materials are all over the place. They can't find anything. Organization is a huge problem for them. They get on their medication or they get back in therapy, learn some strategies, and you see instant changes in their process. I literally have seen people go from failing the test 10 plus times and working with them, getting them on a proper plan, and then making sure they're getting the mental health support they need to actually deal with their anxiety or ADHD or whatever it is, then they end up passing. So save yourself the money and get a therapist early instead of spending $10,000 taking this test over and over and over again because different things are hindering you and you don't realize it. Another thing is to make sure that you're eating and sleeping. This is not the time to say to yourself, I'm just not going to sleep for 4 months. I've heard coaches say that. Oh, I'm just not going to sleep for the next 4 months. I'll eat takeout every night. You are acquiring so much information in your brain. You need to have good nutrition and proper sleep to actually consolidate everything you're learning. Not to mention, you need 30 minutes a day at the least of some kind of self-care time. More is not always better when it comes to studying. Studying 40 hours a week does not make you pass any more than the person who studied the recommended amount of 15 to 20 hours a week, even if your anxiety is telling you that. Remember, anxiety is irrational. It doesn't really know what works. It's just telling you to do things to make it go away, to make the feeling go down, but it doesn't actually work. It's important to use a study schedule. I cannot tell you how important the schedule is, especially if you're balancing family, work, a significant other. Having a study schedule will help you to be able to be on when you need to be on and off when you need to be off. It helps you focus better. It helps you to retain information better, and it actually ensures that studying will happen. So you want to make sure that you have a study schedule that is realistic and that works with your natural rhythm. If you're not a night owl, don't try to study at night. If you're a night owl, don't try to study first thing in the morning. Work with your natural rhythms and do what works for you. Let's see here. It's also important to set up a study space. Your study space should not be a space that coincides with relaxation or sleep. I've met so many people, they're studying in bed, they're studying on the couch. You have to stop that. You have to pick a place that actually puts you in the mode of studying. It could be a fold-up table in the corner. It could be, I was living in a studio apartment when I was doing mine. So my study space was also my dining room table, my desk, my everything. And so what I would do is I kept all my study materials under the desk out of sight. So I couldn't visually see all of that stuff. Whenever I sat down to study, I just pulled out what I needed and I kept the space clean. And then when I was done studying, I put all of that away and then I could use the space for other things and help transition my brain. And then when it was time to no longer study, I would leave the space. Let's see here. Also, you want to make sure that with your study materials that you do keep everything organized by domain. Again, I was broke. I had no money. I used paper clips. I used rubber bands. I found stuff around the house, old folders, old binders. I used whatever I had. I did not buy a single thing. I even kept all of my flashcards in like old grocery bags. I mean, I just used whatever I had. But the thing is everything was divided up by domain. So when I sat down to study a domain, I just grabbed those items and I was ready to go. When you're studying, it's also important to make sure you take breaks. I've had people say things like, no, I can study 6 hours straight. I don't need to stop. No. Or this isn't a time to try to prove that you're like a studying superhero or something. This is the time to listen to yourself, take breaks as needed. I personally, because I had ADHD, I took breaks every 20 to 30 minutes with 3 to 5 minutes off, and I actually used a timer. And that really kept me on task. And I only had certain things I was allowed to do during breaks. So I couldn't turn on the TV. I couldn't go on my phone. I only allowed myself to like stretch and do certain things, go to the bathroom if needed, so that I wouldn't get distracted. So I'm going to stop there for a second. Anyone have any questions about some of those recommendations? Or are you realizing that maybe you've been studying on the couch and that's probably not helpful for you?
Well, the questions are coming in. As you were talking, I was remembering one of our early members who I in the beginning, when I had more time, I would meet one-on-one with people before they joined the coaching circle and just get a sense of what was going on and make sure it was a good fit. And she had, in the screen behind her, a wall of multicolored note cards that were just all mishmashed in together, right? And everything written so small that you couldn't see it, and it was the whole wall, and they weren't in rows. It was just like madness. And I asked her, like, well, what's the system? Like, I can't tell by looking at it. And she was like, oh, I don't have one. Just everything on a note card just got stuck somewhere on the wall with some colored note card. I was just like, I can't even, right? Both in terms of the space not being conducive to studying and also the materials not being organized. It was really bad study skills. It stressed me out looking at it. And that's what I saw behind her. And I'm sure what she saw behind herself anytime she was in like any kind of Zoom meeting, it just was like jaw dropping.
Wow. And that will make you not want to study. When I worked with people who have had multiple attempts and they've hoarded a lot of study materials, a lot of times they don't even end up using them because there's so much, they don't even know where to start. And so it really just isn't helpful to have everything kind of splattered everywhere. We have to create a system that will work for you. I want to talk a little bit in these last couple of minutes about our mindset around passing. So I really liken this process to preparing for a marathon. Unless you are already a pro athlete, running a marathon sounds really intimidating to most people. And so half the battle, again, is getting out there, conditioning the body, but also training your mind to believe that it can actually do it. So similar to when you exercise, what do we always have to do before and after a workout to make sure that our body is good to go? Does anyone want to type? What do we have to do? Yes. Dr. Jordan says stretch. Absolutely. We have to warm up the body. And this is very similar to when you're studying. You have to make sure your brain is warmed up and ready to take in this information because you are not going to learn everything you need to learn for this test in one study session. Just like your body is not going to be ready to run a marathon from a couple of runs. It's the consistency over time that allows you to be able to get the content knowledge that you need or get the body conditioned. And so it's super important that when you're sitting down to study, that you're getting yourself in the right headspace. So personally, I'm a big believer in the power of visualization and affirmations / positive self-talk. So personally, what I would do every time I sat down to study is I would take a few deep breaths, in for 4, hold for 4, out for 4. And I would just relax any tension I felt in my body. Because remember, just sitting down at the study space would often cause me some physiological arousal of anxiety. So I would just calm that right down, release any of the tension I felt. And then I would visualize a quick image in my mind of something related to me passing this test, whether it be running out with a passing score or calling a family member to tell them I passed, or picturing myself celebrating with friends that I've passed or that I've received my license. I would just picture something like that, and I would really connect with it and try to feel the emotions that one would feel when that's happening. And then I would say my personal mantra that really helped me to feel that I could pass this test. And for everyone, they're going to have their own mantra. And then I would begin to study. And what I found is that that would really help me to just center myself and get myself ready to study. Now, for some people are like, they're not a very visual person, or maybe they don't like mantras or whatever. There's a million things you can do. You can pet your cat or your dog before you study and just soothe yourself that way. You can stretch, you can listen to uplifting song, you can go for a walk, you can say a prayer if you're a praying person, you can meditate for a moment, do a quick mindfulness exercise. There's no right or wrong answer. It's just about whatever works for you. And what you'll find is that you'll get so much more out of your study session if you do that in the beginning as well as at the end, to kind of release the study session and then be able to transition to go be mom or go be caretaker or go be spouse or whatever other roles you play in your life. I cannot tell you how much of a game changer this is. And not only can you use it at the beginning and middle or at the end of your study session, but anytime you start to feel negativity creeping in, you get to a flashcard, with a concept that you're really struggling to learn, and that feeling of, oh my gosh, how can I learn this stuff? How am I ever going to be? The moment those thoughts creep in, stop. Take a few deep breaths, say your mantra, write your mantra down. I can do this, whatever it takes. But you have to learn how to shift your energy really quickly and not get sucked into the black hole of those negative emotions, because then for the rest of your study session, you probably won't even know what happened and you're not going to take anything in. And then the next time you sit down to study, you're not going to feel like you're getting traction, which just further perpetuates these emotions and negative beliefs that you can't do this. So sometimes my coaches in the past, they kind of like let this stuff go in one ear and out the other because they just get really focused on the strategy of it all. And I'm like, this is the ultimate strategy, because without this, nothing else that you're doing is going to make anything stick. Let me see here. Anything else? Before I talk about the support system, anything you want to add to that, Jordan, or what did you kind of do when you would get yourself? I mean, I know you love studying, but I'm sure there had to be some days where you didn't feel like it.
Yeah, right. So I am a weirdo who likes studying, but I also have had my battles with procrastination, right? Even though you like things, you still procrastinate them. So I think I have them down here, but I had like a bookmark that I was using for my studies that said, just keep swimming, right? From Finding Nemo. And that would be like when you feel like you want to quit or you're getting off track or whatever, it would be just, just keep swimming. Like it's going to be okay. So that's been one of my I guess mantras or self-talk that I use with a lot of things. It's a good one. And I know we've had previous live sessions where individuals have typed their own personal like mantras and positive self-talk out and shared them with the group. And there've been some really good ones. And if you don't have one yet, choose. If you don't have one yet, pick one. If you don't think it's working for you, you can always pick a new one, but it's definitely worth a shot. And I call it stomping on the automatic negative thoughts, right? Looking
Yes.
for when those are popping up. And then I say whack-a-mole, right? Just get them out, right? Replace them with something more balanced. And one of the things I see most often is that people, when they catch themselves in that automatic negative thought, they'll try to go like polar opposite extreme and, like you said, overly flowery, overly fluffy. And that's not right. We don't take that in, but we can take in something more balanced, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah, right. The exam is not a beast, but it's also not a flower, right? It's a challenging exam, but we can pass it, right? Something that's more balanced.
And that's true. That's honestly true. That's not polarized in any way. And so I want to end with making sure we work with our support system. So again, at the time that I was studying, I had a significant other, but they did not live with me. And I didn't have kids or anything. And so many of my coaches do. They have other responsibilities. And I find that a lot of times people are going through this process in like a little silo. They don't talk to their support system about what this test really takes. So often my coaches will say, well, I didn't study because I got distracted. My partner keeps coming in, or they weren't watching the kids, or my kids keep coming in. And I'm like, did we have a family meeting to discuss your study schedule and make a plan of how your partner was going to wrangle the kids while you're studying? Well, no. So a lot of time we have to communicate with our partners. They have to understand this is 3 to 4 months of 15 to 20 hours. It's basically like if you were going to go take on a part-time job, you would sit down with your partner and you would talk about that. You would say, okay, here's are going to be my hours. This is what we'll expect. And you would problem solve together on how you're going to still keep up with the household stuff. They might have to pick up some extra, tasks around the home or help more with child rearing. Or if you caretake for parents, you might have to reach out to siblings and say, hey, I need help. Can we all take turns taking mom to the doctor or whatever it is? You have to reach out to your support system, delegate as much as you can, take things off your plate. I think one of the biggest things people try to do is they try to be everything to everyone during this process, especially people who are from close-knit families. I can't tell you how often my coaches are the glue of their family. They're the person that everybody comes to when they have a problem. They're the problem solver of the family. They're the nurturer of the family. And so they're trying to help everyone else. And the test is just getting their crumbs. And they're never going to pass that way. So we have to communicate with the people you live with or the people who you spend a lot of time with about what this time and energy commitment is really going to be. And I have seen things change for people where they can't even get study hours in because kids are coming in, partners doing whatever they want to do. And when they finally get everyone on board, things just start clicking. Studying starts to happen, or they figure out that their partner's going to take over the kids while they leave the house and go somewhere else to study. Like I've seen extended family come out of the woodwork, do laundry for people, cook meals, or even just send prayers and good vibes. Like whatever people can do, we'll take it, but they won't know how they can help you unless you open your mouth and tell them. So think about who are your cheerleaders? How can they provide support? And what limits do you need to put on your time? Thank you, Deborah, for coming. I'll see you soon. And last but not least, when it comes to your test date, you may not want to tell a whole lot of people. In fact, I recommend telling no more than 5, and they should be the bare minimum people who need to know. That way, if things don't work out, you don't have to tell 20 million people that things didn't work out. So that's what I have today. We have a few minutes for questions, comments, concerns.
That is so thorough. That is so thorough, and I love how you really touched upon all the biggies, right? All of the I know I'm so careful of my language, but like the traps that people fall into, right? The obstacles that individuals are needing to overcome in order to be successful on the exam. And I know that, amongst the people on today, everyone is dealing with at least one, if not 5 or 6 or 7 of these. And that's why they've reached out for support or they want to be on a webinar, right? There is that acknowledgement that this is hard on your own. It's isolating and how amazing to learn from people who've been there, done that, and like live to learn the other side. In pre-pandemic life, you potentially could have had a weekly study group where you go and you meet at the library or do things that don't happen anymore. And I am a fan of all of the Zoom things that we've got going on, and I love that this can be open to people in all states and countries, but you don't get that same boundary that you would get from, okay, I'm going to the library, I'll be back in 4 hours. I'm going to the coffee
Right.
shop. I'll be back in 2 hours. It is very different. And as you mentioned, a lot of people would really benefit from having their own therapist during this time. Sometimes it's couples counseling, right? Sometimes it's learning how to navigate that in your family.
Mm-hmm.
If said, I'm so thankful I got my studying done before I met my husband. He would not have understood the me needing 20 plus hours a week of time that he's not interrupting me. That would not have happened.
Right.
So very, very glad. Although he's good today. If he chooses to watch this later, I love him and thank you for giving me uninterrupted time to lead this webinar. So we've gotten there, but I could imagine if that was a daily thing, it would have been hard, right, for him to
Right. I mean,
understand.
unless you happen to be married to a lawyer or like some other person who has a similar thing where they've had to go through studying for a large exam, most people just don't get it. And so family will say things like, "Oh, you're smart. It's just another test." And they really just don't know the magnitude of what this really is. Mhm. Does anyone have any questions in the comment box that they want to leave? Or anything that you learned or
What I'm thinking I might do is wrap
Mhm.
up the recorded section and then take off that pressure of my question is being recorded, and just to
Got it.
stay on with everyone live, but stop the recorded feature. And then I think that might open up some more questions. So that's what I'm going to do. So if you're watching this as a recording, thank you for joining us for the recording. And everyone who's on live, we're not going anywhere.